Hello everyone, this is Dan. Before we get started, it's never good to start with an apology, and now here I am doing it for the third week in a row. Because we had some technical problems this week, we've not been able to do the editing work that we usually do on the show, which means two things. Basically, we've had to use the Zoom call audio instead of sprucing up the audio from everybody's mics, and therefore it sounds like a Zoom call. And the other thing is I haven't been able to go through and cut out people swearing, so it's another sweary episode. So apologies for that. I hope that doesn't dent your enjoyment too much. Otherwise, I think it's quite good.
Now the podcast starts.
Hello everyone, if this is your first time listening to the show, welcome. And if you're a returning listener, welcome back, and thanks for sticking with us. This show talks about horror in film, TV, other media, other items which we think of as adjacent to horror, and sometimes other things from our lives which we'd like to talk about just because that's who we are. This week we're going to be having a spoiler-filled discussion of the first two Paranormal Activity films in our missed classic strand, because Paranormal Activity is one of those very significant horror movies I, for one, had never seen before. And we have a number of guest hosts on this show. The hosts vary week to week, but I am TD Velasquez, although you can call me Dan in Greater Manchester. Today I have the pleasure of being joined by
Stella Gaynor in a very sweaty, miserable, horrible Manchester.
Oh dear. Not so bad on my side of Manchester. And also we're very lucky to be joined by a special guest this week.
I'm Ian Winterton in far too sunny Cheshire. Also with a 4-year-old running around. So if you hear 4-year-old child running around. So if you do hear shouting and screaming, it's not Hunter from Paranormal Activity 2. It's my son Elliot.
Right. You're shouting and screaming for me. It's because I've got too hot and I finally jumped out the window. I can't go with it anymore.
You guys in your microclimates, I mean, it's really quite dull here, and I'm not that far away from either of you.
No. I've got the windows closed because Buildy McBilderson across the street is at it again. So I've got the windows closed because it's too loud to have the windows open today. So I have a towel for when I get too hot.
Right, oh dear. Well, luckily it's quiet around here, but I've just realised I do have the window open. So listeners, you may occasionally hear a car driving past. Sorry about that. It's atmosphere.
I should be all right. I've got my door open, but we do have a combine harvester. Sometimes comes into the field that we're overlooking. Just a picture of the paradise I live in.
Wow.
It's not really that nice. It's Winsford. But it is backing over a field that has I don't think they're doing the combine today.
Okay. Well, for the purposes of this podcast, if the combine harvester comes, we'll just imagine people getting caught in its rotors.
Yeah.
In a kind of Children of the Corn sort of way.
It just looked like Jeepers Creepers when it's full. That's what I always think of for some reason. Which isn't very classic, is it? But
you can put some sound effects on it.
Yeah, that's the one that. And I haven't seen In the Tall Grass yet. The Stephen King.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, I haven't seen that.
I started it.
Oh really?
Yeah, and was just
well.
Not really. I didn't finish it, and I've not gone back to it.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nothing was happening, and it wasn't in a good way.
No.
There was no creeping dread or anything in there. Nothing happening. I was just, when you're watching something and then suddenly you realise that I'm just really distracted. I'm not paying attention to this at all.
I think that's a nice segue into Paranormal Activity.
Before we go there,
go
on in. Well, before we go there, we'll just do our bits of news. Have you got any bits of news this week, Stella?
Just two little things. One of them is very, very small. Grimfest in Manchester, the horror film festival, which is going to be online. They've released this week some really nice artwork. They've got various skulls of monsters crawling out of a laptop screen, so that's quite pretty to look at. And the other thing that I saw, which it might not actually be that exciting, it's another slasher film, and it's called Clown Face, and that's going to be released straight to DVD. And it is, as it sounds, it's a fella, I assume, with a human flesh clown mask on his face, running around slashing people, I imagine. But they've gone for the straight to DVD release because obviously nothing's open. But yeah, it looks interesting enough.
So by straight to DVD, you mean, will it be available on streaming? Can you get it from
Not that I'm aware
Amazon?
of. I think you will have to get it from DVD, which is a bit of a shame. Wow. But maybe it'll go to streaming afterwards. But I think the idea of it looks quite nice, and from the trailer or the lighting on it looks really good. It looks a bit sort of Dark Knight meets Texas Chainsaw. So
okay, well, that's
give that a go. If you're someone who can afford DVDs, try that one.
Yeah. Well, the postal services and the couriers will get the DVDs to you.
Yeah.
So I've been taking advantage of that. A couple of bits of news from my end. Nothing spectacular. I do need to apologise to Kirsty, our lovely co-host who's not here this week. She's on holiday in Scotland and has reported that it's all going swimmingly, possibly literally. So that's splendid. But I do need to apologise to her because last week her piece of news was that she's getting a piece published in an anthology of essays about Hannibal, the TV series. And I said I'd put a link to that in our show notes for last week, and I completely forgot to. So I'm going to do it this week instead. It is available for pre-order, so I want to make that as easy as possible for the listeners. That brings me to my other bit of news. I've been published in a minor way today. A big essay I wrote about the Woman in Black has gone up on the digitalfix.co.uk. So that was on the front page today, and I'm really pleased to get that out there. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's mainly about the 1989 version of The Woman in Black, which I'm borderline obsessed with. So the other bit of news is that I finally watched the Blu-ray of that. As I've mentioned on this podcast for the last 3 weeks, I've been very excited about that film coming out on Blu-ray, even though I don't have a Blu-ray player. The disc arrived on Sunday. No, it must have been Saturday. And at first I thought, I'll just put it on the shelf and look at it, it'll be nice. But within 24 hours, I couldn't deal with it anymore. I had to buy a Blu-ray player just so I could watch it. So I did. And it's fantastic. It's a lovely transfer. It's got a really nice commentary on it by Mark Gatiss and Kim Newman and Andy Nyman, the creator of Ghost Stories, who is in The Woman in Black in a really minor role because he was like 20 and it was his first TV. He's in 2 scenes, I think, but he's there on the commentary. It's really nice to hear. And the film looks great. I don't know if you've ever seen anything that's been put out on DVD by Network before, but they are like sticklers for detail. And, if it's a TV thing that was on ITV, they will leave in the bit before the ad break that goes like, "The Sweeney, end of part 2." Things like that, which is just always really nice to see. They've done that here, but they've also done a kind of movie version of The Woman in Black where they've edited those bits out and they've made it into a widescreen ratio so it looks good on your TV, which basically just means that they've zoomed in on the picture slightly. But because it's mastered in Blu-ray high definition, it looks great even zoomed in. And that's me and my mum watched that version of it last night, and it's fantastic. And it's still, I think it's my high watermark of ghost story movies. So
I've never seen it.
You've never seen it? I hugely recommend it.
Need to. I've never seen a Blu-ray either. I've never quite known what exactly to do.
Right. Well, it was new to me. It was. And when I set the Blu-ray up, it has all these things about, it wants permissions to access your internet and all this stuff, because it wants to go on Netflix for you. And I just wanted to play the disc. Just play the disc. So I basically ignored all that. But it works fine. And, I mean, I can't quite see the difference between normal definition, standard definition, and high definition. And part of me thinks this is all a bit of hype, really. But at the same time, I literally said that when CDs came out. It's like, CDs don't really... CDs. I was like, literally, CDs don't sound better than tapes. Tapes are fine. And it took my friend Tim at uni to sit me down and go, no, listen. You know, CDs are a million times better. So, you know.
Well, I was put off Blu-ray. My friend got one, and he said he couldn't wait to watch the Blu-ray of Aliens. He got his Blu-ray player. He's got his Blu-ray of Aliens, and he said it made the models look crap.
Yeah.
It's like suddenly it looks like without disrespect to Jerry Anderson, but it looked like Thunderbirds instead of a Hollywood blockbuster. And he said it looked better.
Well,
sort of on DVD or VHS.
Well, that is the danger when you get an old thing as well and upscale it like that. In the one in Black's case, it looks great. There's nothing, there's no kind of model work in it or effects which would date like that. But yeah, because basically, I think Blu-ray is putting the resolution of a cinema screen on your TV without taking into account that when you went to watch the film at the cinema, you were sitting 25 feet from the screen. Or so, whereas people will watch the DVD, will see their laptop screens or their TV screens really close up. So sometimes it's just too unforgiving, I think. But from the one, from this one experience of Blu-ray, it was good and it was worth seeing. So. All right, folks. Now comes our main discussion of the episode. Full disclosure: the first time we tried to record this discussion, there was a massive problem with my internet, so our recording was interrupted. I'm hoping that won't happen again, and that it wasn't a sign that there's some kind of demonic force connected with these films that affects the internet. I have found some evidence, by the way, guys, I don't know if you're aware, that Paranormal Activity does seem to have some kind of evil supernatural power which affects Google. Because if you Google Paranormal Activity 6, the results that come up are all for Paranormal Activity 5 or the other way around. So basically, there's so many sequels in this franchise that even Google got bored with telling the difference between them. It genuinely took me a while to work out how many there were because the Google results were so confusing.
Well, that's reassuring.
Well, yeah. So,
are there less than there are Police Academy movies? That'd be a good quiz question.
Well, that'll be a test.
Or a Zoom quiz question.
Let's see what happens when I Google Police Academy 7. See.
I think there were 10 Police Academy movies, but.
Oh no, I thought there were only 7.
Oh really? You're more likely to know than me. For some reason I thought there were 10.
The first one without a number was Mission to Moscow. Mission to Moscow, which is the one that Christopher Lee is in. I didn't think there were any more after that, but maybe there were, but they went straight to DVD.
They went out on a high.
Yeah. He was very proud of his performance in that film, was Christopher Lee. Demonstrating his comic ability.
I just read a really good quote of his this morning on Twitter. It came up. Every actor at some point in their career has to do bad movies. The trick is not to be bad in them.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, fair enough.
Which is kind of his career.
His career more or less defines that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Bless him. No, loads of actors would dream of having that much work.
Well, yeah.
Anybody would. So, welcome to the podcast, Ian. You've recorded for us before, but the listeners haven't heard you before because you came to talk about Halloween 2018 with us, and we haven't released that episode yet. So that's in the archives. So this is your first live appearance on the podcast. Welcome to the show.
Hello. We hope so, anyway.
Yes. Ian's a great writer and screenwriting tutor, and also film critic. With
many years standing.
Yeah.
Longer than any other job. Since I've reviewed my first film at university, and my latest review was the other day.
Wow! What was your first film that you reviewed?
you know what? I think it might have been Reservoir Dogs.
Oh,
Wow.
That was 92.
wow.
Right. Yeah.
And then, and I can remember that. I can't remember what I reviewed the other day off the top of my head.
That suggests it wasn't very good.
It's probably more like to be something for a streaming service and not actually a film.
Well, yes,
Anyway,
at the moment.
Because I write a lot for Vodzilla.co, and a lot of that is TV because it's streaming these days.
Okay.
Which is the growth market in everything.
Well, yeah, it's
Including
what we're all coming to
film
rely on.
journalism.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
nice one, fella. Well, if you have any links to any current stuff that I can put in the show notes for this episode, please send them my way. I'll add them. And no doubt you have tons of creative writing projects going on, which you may or may not be able to talk about for production purposes.
I can do. If
Okay.
you want to talk about them, but
Well,
I've just been talking to Ramsey Campbell this very morning, actually.
That's wonderful. Ramsey
who is-
Campbell, the noted horror novelist.
because we've got an option to make an audio drama of his 80s classic horror, The Hungry Moon, and because of COVID-19, he kindly extended the option, and now he's kindly extended it again because
Bless him.
because it was starting to become a rush to get it done in the next few months, and now we've got till July. But the news we were going to announce is Louise Jameson of Doctor Who fame is definitely on board.
Oh, wow.
But she's still definitely on board. It's just when we're going to record it. It's probably in 2021 now.
Right.
So we won't be announcing it with great fanfare till later on. But
That's fantastic.
but it's still an official thing I can still talk about. So that's good.
That's brilliant. Well,
But it gives me longer in between childcare to get the other episodes written.
sure, yeah.
So,
Well, I hope you'll be able to come back on the show and talk about that.
I think we'll get Ramsey on as well.
Oh, that'll be splendid. That would be a delight. Oh, marvellous.
He's a good writing service, Ramsey.
He's a lovely chap. So, nice one. Well then, welcome to the show, Ian. And I think it's time we got talking about Paranormal Activity. Now, this falls under the rubric of our missed classics strand. Films that one or more of us have just never seen for some reason, but which are quite significant in the history of horror. I'm the one who hasn't seen Paranormal Activity, or rather, I hadn't seen it. Obviously, I've watched it now, otherwise this podcast would be a bit pointless. It was made in 2009. Sorry, it was released in 2009, but based on an expanded version of a film that was originally released in 2007, or produced then. And it's basically a very small-scale ghost story about a couple in San Diego who become convinced that there's some kind of supernatural entity in their house, and the male partner, whose name is Mika, decides that he needs to get evidence of the haunting on camera. So he buys a new camera, one new enormous camera, which was a surprise to me. Only just over a decade ago, but he buys one big massive camera and sets it up and goes about recording everything in the house possible so that they can capture the haunting on camera, and therefore the film justifies its kind of found footage approach, because you don't see anything in the film except what is captured by Mika's camera. And I've never seen it for one of two reasons. Possibly because it seemed a little cheap to me, that the idea was like, basically, let's do the Blair Witch Project again, but now it's just in a house. So like an even more small-scale version of the Blair Witch Project, which struck me as not very exciting. But also some people were genuinely, it seems, hugely frightened of it, and I was a little bit scared to watch it, because even though I love these kind of ghost stories, they do scare me so much, and I've got to be steeled for them. So it was something that I was getting around to, and it's just dragged on rather a long time. Stella, what's your story with this film? Had you seen it before?
Yeah, I had. So I think that I requested that we do Paranormal Activity as part of the Missed Classics thread, because in 2010 was the year that I first taught the horror module at Manchester Met. And at the start of the module, we did a thing where we asked all the students to write down, number one, what was their favourite horror movie, and number two, what was their scariest horror movie, because they're not necessarily always the same thing. And so this was in 2010, and near enough all of the students in the group, and it would have been about 60 of them, nearly all of them put Paranormal Activity down as their scariest movie. And I was like, okay, and I'd not seen it at the time. So I went and duly watched it, and I thought it was, well, it was scary enough. I think it did the job. And I think there was elements of it that I found to be, or rather it did a very good job of scaring students, scaring that bunch of people, by not doing very much. And I thought that was clever enough. So the first thing that you see in the film that's definitely causes a jump or a moment is the bedroom door moves. When Mika is filming at night and the bedroom door moves, and apparently everybody in cinema, you know, shut themselves at that stage. And it's like, okay, so all you've done is move a door and it's frightened everyone. That's really good. In terms of the formulaicness of it, I guess, yes, it is formulaic and it is repetitive, but then, you know, horror is, all slashers are the same, all someone's possessed and you have to have an exorcism, the films, they're all the same. So I think its formulaicness and repetitiveness isn't necessarily a problem. And also, I did want to have a discussion, and also a point to why I think it's could come under the idea of missed classics, is that I think it does get sidelined by critics and writers and scholars and academics and all those good people because it's a found footage. So found footage is like the worst of horror, and I think it's unfairly maligned, and I think it'd be interesting to talk about it. And if any of our listeners have not seen it, should definitely go and see it, because it was an important enough movie for all those young people in 2010 to go, that's the scariest movie ever. I thought it was great, and it's still sticking in people's minds now, and it's still doing well on, you know, over on Netflix and whatnot.
And
so,
do you find with your students now, because my students now still mention it, that and then Insidious because of it, and not necessarily many of the sequels, but 1 and 2 and 3 they tend to have all seen, in a period of their teenage lives.
Yeah, you know, it's films that you see in your formative years stick with you, don't they? Which we've talked about this before. When, you know, Scream's the one for me that's always stuck with me. But I, you know, when I was supervising dissertations for the academic year that's just finished, there was at least 2 of them, including Paranormal Activity, still wanting to write about it, still wanting to research around it. So it is, I think it is quite an important point in contemporary horror.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'll pick you up on a couple of points there, Stella. So firstly, I think a word which I'd use to describe this film is minimalist. It's like it does the absolute minimum it can. And therefore, to pick you up on your other point where you said in case people have not seen it, if you haven't seen it, don't listen to the rest of this podcast, because we are going to have to talk about everything that happens in the film, because really very little does happen, and therefore if you avoided all the plot spoilers, you'd have nothing left. And I think the same probably applies to Paranormal Activity 2, which we're going to go on to as well.
We could not possibly talk about it tripping over. Try not to spoil it. So stop listening now.
I mean, and I think it's fair enough to spoil it. That's fine, because the title of the film is in the episode, and people can go and watch it. And as I say, it's on the BBC iPlayer, guys. You know, it's available for free. And it's on Amazon Prime at the moment, if you remember. So it's easy to get to.
Yeah, I also think even if you had a blow-by-blow account, it's about the atmosphere anyway.
Yeah.
Knowing it'd be impossible to say this story is going to creak at that point. You're looking for a creaking door, whether you know you're looking for a creaking door or not. If you get into the atmosphere of the film, that's how it works anyway. So it'll still make you jump even though you know it's coming.
Absolutely.
It made me jump and I was on a rewatch.
Well, it's all about the context.
I jumped at the same points as well. Come on, you know what's coming.
No, I think it's all about the context. You can tell me that, I mean, I think I knew that, there's a scary bit where nothing happens except a door moves by itself. And obviously that's not frightening when someone tells you and you're expecting it. But at the same time, the film puts you in a situation where you're kind of primed to respond to that. I mean, you know what I thought was one of the most unsettling details in the film was that, I mean, a great deal of the movie is when Mika sets up his camera in the corner of their bedroom and they're just sleeping in the bed.
Yeah.
And every single night, I think they go to sleep with the door open.
I know.
And so you're just looking at this open doorway with just darkness beyond it. And
my wife will not let us have an open door.
Right.
Like,
yeah, I think
she can't watch horror films because she can't in real life have an open door in the bedroom while we're asleep.
This film's really not for her then, is it?
No. This is something I watch by myself. This is the end of my life. But I was going to say the whole thing about, it's weird because I don't think we can talk about this film either without talking about Blair Witch Project.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of those films, if we're talking about the generation that grew up on Paranormal Activity, they don't talk about Blair Witch very often, in my experience.
Okay.
They know what it is, but they're not bothered by it. Whereas I think Blair Witch Project is far scarier.
Well, we did list it a few weeks ago.
Haunted me for weeks, and when I've rewatched it, it haunted me again. So I think a sort of compare and contrast would be. Yeah, this film wouldn't exist if it wasn't for Blair Witch Project.
No, I think it's fair. I think, like I say, it is a deliberately an even more lo-fi version of Blair Witch. Yeah. And in a way, I feel a bit peevish towards them. They got away with that. It's like, well, I could have done that. I could have just done the Blair Witch Project, but in my house.
I know.
So Ian, tell us more about your reactions to it, both when you initially saw it and rewatching it for this podcast.
I initially saw it in a screening room in Soho, whenever it came out. And it's weird with horror films. I often think they're like comedy. If you're in a room that isn't being funny, then a comedy can die on its ass, which is why they always get critics drunk. They always have loads of free beer and wine at screenings for comedies. And with horror movies, sometimes I think it works both ways. And in this case, I think it worked in the benefit of the movie because the atmosphere in there was critics we hate watching films with the general public. Call them the talkers. That's like a term. Did you go and watch a movie? Oh, I didn't catch it at a screening. I had to go and watch it with the talkers, meaning you had to pay the ticket and go and see it down the multiplex. Whereas if you're sitting in a room full of really serious critics who are all, you mustn't talk or utter a breath, you mustn't even breathe loudly because we're watching a movie, even if it's Snow Dogs or I don't know, whatever crap you've been sent to watch. And so for a movie like Paranormal Activity, it really worked well, which is why I think it got quite good reviews because people were generally like, oh, I imagine if I was a normal person, I'd be scared of this. So I shall write that. And I think that translated to the audiences being scared as well if you got the right atmosphere in the cinema. But I also wonder if a lot of the success of this is that it's the DVD thing you watch at home, and is it scarier either in a really well-behaved cinema audience or watching it by yourself where it's just you and the hairs on the back of your neck.
Yeah,
which is how a lot of us watch movies now. It's this. I remember The Exorcist is one of my favourite films ever, and probably the most scary film for me. So it's in your students list. It's both for me, and that's why I like it. If a movie actually somebody says a movie's scary, I'm putting that movie on because there's nothing. The fact it's actually going to scare me would be a miracle. So I find The Exorcist really scary, and I still do. And then I remember going to see it when it was re-released at the cinema, and it was one of the most depressing experiences of my life because people were just laughing their heads off and throwing popcorn about because they swear and there's pea soup coming out of her mouth, and they just saw it for what it was. Not for what it was, but they saw it as the most stupid movie they'd ever seen, and they'd seen the scary movies before they'd seen it, and so
I remember that time
in the least scary thing ever, you know.
I remember that time in '98 very clearly. That was quite depressing.
Yeah, was it God? Was it '98?
It was, yeah, the 25th anniversary.
I'm still scarred by how depressing that was. But it's just for me, that's just one of the best chillers ever made. And Blair Witch had a similar kind of thing. I watched it at cinema quite empty, and it was really effective.
Yeah.
And then other people went to see it, and they just came out going, "That was so funny," and we had such a laugh. And did you think it was scary? Of course I didn't.
Oh no.
So I think it's very subjective as well. Watching a scary movie.
I think a lot of it is to do with context. I can't really imagine what people find hilarious about the Blair Witch Project. I can imagine people being bored by it.
I think they were just joking and sitting there and throwing stuff at each other and laughing and going, "What's going on now?" Then making quips over the top of it.
Well,
and if you start laughing at her going with a close up of her nose, then you're lost, aren't you? As an audience member to a scary movie.
Well, that's a fair point.
Yeah. I must say, jumping ahead, there were moments I wasn't sure if you were supposed to laugh in Paranormal Activity 2, especially.
Oh, right, okay.
I was a bit like, are they really making a big thing of that pool cleaner? I did laugh quite a lot, but then it was kind of a joke he was playing.
Yeah.
That good dad joke, that wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. But it's so when
you rewatched Paranormal Activity 1 this time, Ian, did your opinion change?
I think it was it's weird because at the time I just thought, well done, it's an effective chiller. I didn't think it was the best thing I'd ever seen when I first watched it. I just thought it was an effective chiller and probably gave it 4 stars. But now I'd say I do think it's much more average with the passing of time.
Right, okay.
I'm not saying I hate it, and I'm saying it does scare me, but of all the movies that have ever come out, it's like very little happens. I mean, to the point of it being minimalist.
Yeah.
So little happens, and I wonder if I don't know. Like
I think it was interesting.
Barely any foreshadowing. It's literally just watching people doing stuff for real.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot to talk about with that. Like you watched Host last week.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting. You watch Host, that did an hour, and it wasn't just people doing nothing.
No, it did set things up.
It was a seance straight away. You're going, "Ooh, spooky!" You know it's coming. A far superior film to Paranormal Activity.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that.
That's a classic.
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Already,
one of the best horror. That's the best chiller I've seen in such a long time.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you mentioned Host. Obviously, I think one of the reasons that we chose to do Paranormal Activity now was that we were in the mood for it following Host.
Yeah.
And also because the director of Host, Rob Savage, when we spoke to him, I can't remember, I think it was in the spoiler bit of our conversation, which we haven't released on the podcast yet.
Mm-hmm.
But he told us that one of his favourite scary movies was Paranormal Activity 3. And that was what he actually sat his cast down in front of and said, "This is what we're going for."
Yeah, which I haven't seen.
I haven't seen it. No, but it does look interesting because it's a prequel to these two that we have seen.
Is it set using older technology?
Yes, it's set in the 80s.
Right,
I think, or the early 90s.
So kind of Blair Witch.
But apparently quite well done, and it's from the directors who made that movie Catfish.
Right.
So actual documentarians have put it together, so it sounds like it comes from some quite interesting angles. For my part, then, having seen the film for the first time ever, 2 things. Another word I would apply to it is quaint. Oddly, it struck me as quite quaint in how simple it was. How not elaborate it was. But also it did frighten me. It worked perfectly well. I was really into it, and it genuinely chilled me a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only really got two characters. I cared for them both. I was engaged by them. The other major character is this psychic that they go to for help halfway through, and he basically just comes in and goes, "Sorry, I can't help you.
Yeah, sorry.
I've got to go.
Gotta go. He just gets off."
And actually, that was a really good device for just increasing the tension, I thought. I really like that.
It was, but it also felt a little bit pointless. Maybe I'm just such a structure whore, but
okay.
To have him come in again and then him have literally no effect on the narrative made me feel a bit like, well, if that turns out to have something else going on, then that's quite clever. But no, just.
I think it was just Katie needing some help, because she was getting no help from Mika, who I think shows himself to repeatedly just be a crap boyfriend. You won't listen to her at all, and she keeps asking him to stop and asking him to stop, and he continues and continues and continues. And I just think he's a bit of a wrong-un.
Right.
But because you mentioned before Insidious and all that sort of stuff that came after, I think Paranormal Activity at the time for sort of larger horror audiences was that it was quite refreshing. So Paranormal Activity is coming out in 2009, was it?
Yeah.
Before that, you've had the glut of zombie movies, you've had all the Saw films, torture porn's been and gone. So I think Paranormal Activity, in its minimalism, and it's just, we're just going to tell a good old-fashioned ghost story while using the conceit of found footage, I think was just quite refreshing to the horror crowd, because, we'd not been haunted for a while. We'd having people, chopped up and tortured. And I think, and while I love all those films as well, I think it was just a nice, refreshing change. And I think it clearly set off a cycle of hauntings that have just got more and more money thrown at them now. So, the budgets of the Insidious movies just went up and up and up.
The Conjuring and
Annabelle and all that stuff.
The success of Paranormal Activity is what created Blumhouse, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Blumhouse.
Exactly.
So
is it Blumhouse or Blumhouse? I'm never sure.
I would say Blumhouse.
I'd say Blumhouse.
But I don't know.
But I think that's one of the reasons why it works as a classic, because I think it definitely marks a point of, you've got one sort of horror cycle that's come to an end. I think it was starting off not the mainstream horror cycle, because obviously there's horror going on in other places as well, but in the mainstream cinemas at your Odeons and whatnot, it was marking a new cycle of horror, I think. And whether it was too minimalist for you, or the structure wasn't great, I think it's a very important sort of cornerstone or touching point, I guess, if you're looking at horror looking at it historically, with what was going on then, what was going on then. I think its use of the found footage elements, I think it did two things that I thought really worked as found footage. So I like the obvious, really, really obvious and slightly cheesy title card at the beginning. Paramount Pictures would like to thank the family of blah, 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 for the footage. I always love a good based on true events card.
Like the one at the start of Return of the Living Dead.
And then Cloverfield as well. I love the title cards. This footage was found. So I do enjoy that. But I think it stepped away from, we're just going to have all this at night when it's scary. There are sequences in the day, which is, is an interesting thing to do, because if the activity is getting, the paranormal activity, in fact, is getting more and more intense, then it starts happening in the daytime. And they do this in the second one as well. They bring it down to the daytime, which I think is great, because you just can't hide secrets there. You've got to have it all out, and I think that works. And you can still have the tension and the jumpiness, and you don't have to just have, like I said, a door moving in the dark. They do experiment, because Blair Witch is great, but it's scary because you can't see anything, and the camera's shaking all the time and moving black and white to colour. And I think a lot of the Blair Witch stuff is hidden in the shakiness. Whereas Paranormal Activity 1 and 2, because you've got a lot of static shots, you have to look for what you should be looking at, and your eye has to move all around the screen.
The use of negative space in the frame and wide shots.
It's just really, I think it's really well done, and come with me on this.
The second one has... Sorry, Ian, you go first. We're talking over each other.
Sorry, yeah. I'm just saying, yeah. It's I guess it's almost a mirror image in film grammar of the shaky camera, confusion and that sort of came out of we got used to seeing people running around with camcorders, and it being shaky. Long time before mobile phones, and then we got used to static shots of houses from webcam era coming in.
Didn't people get a bit queasy watching Blair Witch? Wasn't that reported?
I think
some
so,
people were like,
it was.
that was hard to watch. Yeah.
But also at the end of the 2000s, you'd also come through the kind of action movie style period where everything looked like the Bourne Identity. So shaky camera was how you filmed action sequences.
Yeah.
So it really
is just got so boring.
Yeah.
So, whip pan every 5 minutes.
To just have a static shot for ages is such a refreshing change. And I think one of the wonderful things they do in this film is the time-lapse moments where the time code just speeds up and you see that there's nothing happening in the room for so long, or something spooky happens.
Yeah, when she stands over the bed.
Yeah, that's
you realise it's been an hour and a half.
Yeah,
she's not me.
That's like fantastic.
Well, that's quite clever because it's probably 10 minutes, and then they.
You could just. That's what
you're going to stand there for an hour and a half. We can't possibly think of another way we can achieve this. But my big theory on it is our ways of watching. I remember watching The Truman Show.
I love that film.
Love it. I remember watching it and when it came out and thinking, oh, it's quite good this. And then when there's a bit where they're going, I just like to watch him sleep. I remember thinking, well, yeah, that's a bit far-fetched. And literally 4 years later, we were at a party in our house and we had Big Brother on in the corner in the laptop, like they were sleeping, and we were
right.
I just went, oh God, this is like the Truman Show, isn't it? and so that became real. And then that period of reality TV, how much of it was just here's the overview of the Big Brother house. And you got used to looking at screens with very little happening in them.
Yeah.
And so we got used to watching stuff without cuts and without edits, with long shots and it being very real. So there's sort of what, to me, I think now we've come through the other side, seems a little bit overly boring, overly real. I think that's the way it's aged. Is at the time, seeing a movie that doesn't bother foreshadowing, literally just shows some people gabbling on some nonsense in their real life for 20 bloody minutes. Just, you could see why it got rejected by Sundance and people, because they probably gave it 20 minutes when nothing's happened.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is, when it was initially premiered in 2007 at those festivals, it went down well enough that it was picked up by Paramount and later released. But apparently Steven Spielberg, who did say that it was the most frightening film he'd ever seen, I think.
Oh, wow.
He suggested, but it needs a new ending. So the bit right at the end where you do have a stunt and a shock effect, that wasn't on it before. I wonder what its original ending looked like and how satisfying was that as a movie, because I do think because you've seen nothing happen for an hour and a half, that ending, as minimal as it is, does have some power.
Yeah.
And,
some of the other endings, look, they've got about 4 different endings for different territories, haven't they? And one of them is Katie in full Reagan from The Exorcist mode with sharp teeth.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Which looks kind of spooky.
Okay.
But they went, the version which is the one we watched on BBC, is that the sort of generally acceptable?
Well, the one I saw
was the Kelvin universe, and which is the...
I assume that... Well, I actually checked the ending of the one on Prime as well, and they're both the same. So it's the ending where Mika flies from the door and hits the camera.
Thrown, doesn't he?
And then...
that delay between Katie's amazing scream, so she gets up and she goes downstairs and she screams. It's one of the best screams ever. Micah leaps out of bed, he runs downstairs. There's a delay before he gets chucked at the camera, and it's just long enough for you to calm down a bit. And then he hits the camera. And I watched it this time like you did on a laptop with headphones on, because my husband was doing something else in the same room and he wanted nothing to do with it. And the delay and waiting, and I knew he was going to get thrown, and because it was so loud in my earphones, I did sort of jump and scrabble at the back of the sofa a little bit. And it's like, the delay is just long enough for you to be like, oh, it's over. And
I think
it's really, really
having
not.
the headphones on as well, something else that's really good about it is very simple. Again, it's audio.
The rumble.
It makes it basically, it might be static, but it's not silent.
Yeah.
No.
Something to make you more spooky. It's probably got some CIA audio pulses coming in your ear.
Right.
Rumbling stuff.
Yeah, it's that
and
low
you're
rumble.
settled. If it was just still without audio, would it be as scary?
Definitely not.
No,
Tells us
certainly
when
not.
to start looking, because it does the growing dread noisy bits.
Well, this was the case.
Which are also audio cues.
Yeah, I mean, that was the case with Host as well. I commented on the quality of the sound design of that, and I think with any found footage movie, you know, the sound design is crucial because it's the only part of the movie where you can actually be creative as a filmmaker. You can make creatively motivated cuts and you know, modulations, whereas, you know, everything visual has to appear unmediated, but you can actually adjust elements of the audio, and they do things that at the end of Paranormal Activity 2, which is set at the same time or the day after the end of Paranormal Activity 1, Katie reappears, doesn't she, and she's possessed. But because of the way they're using huge wide shots, there's a bit where she is just in the background at some distance, and I actually didn't notice that she was there.
Which bit's that?
Just, you know,
when she's in, before she snaps his neck.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
He's still listening. We did warn you, but
yeah. It's tough now.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
But
so
I mean,
you see her over in the far background, don't you?
Yeah. And the thing is,
in the living room area.
because it was such a wide, long shot, I didn't actually notice her there. But I heard the music, or rather the kind of rumble tone.
Yeah.
So I thought, I that made me tense. I just thought, right, something's happening. And then I rewound it because the next bit it cuts back and she's come a lot closer, and I was just like, where the hell she come from? Was that set up? So I had to rewind it. But the point is made that the sound design still did the job of kind of raising the tension at the same time without doing much notable. I mean, it just sounds like someone switched the dehumidifier on, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's enough.
Yeah.
And you get that same rumble at the end of both movies because there's a delay before the credits roll as well. So I think it's time enough for the film to end. Let's say you're in the cinema, for the film to end and for it to stick with the conceit of this is found footage, so there isn't a crew.
Yeah.
It's Paramount would like to thank whoever, Micah and family. So there's a long delay for the credits roll just with that rumbling sound, by which point people have got off and left the cinema, and then the credits go. I think they're still leaning into this is. Yeah.
Now, the sound design was clever. I bet they had some sort of thing where we go, like you say, it needs to sort of be based on urban domestic sounds, but also be creepy. And I think that's exactly right. It sounds like it could be the aircon kicking in, or just pipes, or, you know, those general noises coming from the tumble dryers on in the cellar. But we don't think any of that, but also we subconsciously don't go, where do the cellos come from? Or anything.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if
they've not got violins coming in.
If they did use musical score, that would obviously break it.
Yeah.
So they can't break that reality. But
obviously it's music of a kind. It's but electronic.
It's scoring.
Abstract music. Yeah.
But it doesn't register with your brain as artificial in the same way. It doesn't break
which is really clever as well. Yeah. And no, it'd be one of those ones. I'd like to see how much of it was sort of, once Paramount had got hold of it and put it together, how much of those sort of decisions came later, or how many were sort of in the original piece.
Yeah. I bet they went to town on the sound.
Yeah. If it was quite a quiet piece, then I imagine why it was kind of like, well, a bit like watching someone's home movie that happens to be a bit scary. Isn't quite the same as watching a scary movie.
That's polished.
But I still found it quite bizarrely nothingy for 20 minutes. Just, I mean, did I miss a door opening? when does that door open? Because I remember looking down and I made I wrote down 20 minutes in, creaky door. So this creaky door was 20 minutes in.
Yeah.
20 minutes of people going, oh my God, I'm an American doing an American thing. that was kind of how that. And I don't think, again, compared to the host, one thing that had on its side was amazing good actors, and I don't know if these two, well, the material they were given, I wasn't that interested in listening to them doing stuff. So it wasn't like it was entertaining with a bit of foreshadowing and then a creaky door. It was people who were kind of like white noise, and then so I also didn't care what happened to them as much as other people in horror movies.
I cared about Katie.
I cared about Katie. I think
the
reason,
really cold, but in terms of creating a drama with characters you care for, I thought they were so cookie cutter and then they didn't have very much interesting stuff to say.
Yeah.
I didn't think that the first 20 minutes were basically dull. There's no two ways about it.
Well, I think the first 20 minutes.
I don't think dull as in it's a slow burn. Like I love a slow burn horror movie, but if The Witch is one of my favourite movies of recent times, and that bores the pants off so many people, and I love it. But
I love a slow burn start.
Scary movie from the beginning. Pardon?
I love a slow burn start, and I feel that you've got to be building up to a point. There's no point starting with a loud jump or something attention grabbing.
No,
it's
but
much better to build
door
up.
20 minutes.
But I agree. But the before the creaky door in this film, it is basically like watching somebody else's home movies.
And not even a bit that they'd even show people.
Yeah. But to be fair, I don't think I want to hold that against it, because I feel like that might have been what they were after.
Well, it's a creative decision, and I'd argue it was of its time. Because, like I said, we maybe got more used to just mindlessly watching other people being mindless.
Yeah, the mundane reality.
Like we were, I don't know about you, but I never thought I'd be the sort of person to watch a live feed of Big Brother, but you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right.
Went for a phase of it being on. Went for a phase of it being on in the corner just because it was there. The technology was there.
Yeah, just because.
And it was like, well, there's a live feed of people's bedrooms, and you weren't putting it on for prurient reasons. You weren't putting it on because anything might happen. You're putting it on because it was on.
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, they've put cameras into the house, and it's literally on 24 hours a day. And that weird green glow in the corner. Wow, I feel like I'm in the future. There was that sort of, there was that kind of thing going on, and it was so moronic. It was so disturbing on so many levels. But I think it did get us used to watching paint dry.
Yeah.
A lot more. Like that, they literally watched paint dry on a Channel 5 thing in the early 2000s. They had a competition where they were painting a wall, and then it literally was the paint was drying on the live feed.
Oh God, do you remember when?
And people were watching it.
Channel 4 did the one where people had to stay awake the longest.
Oh, touch the truck.
It was like, it's for a car.
Yeah, touch the truck.
But they were allowed to move around though.
Yeah, but you had to keep your hand on the truck.
No, there's another one where they just had to stay awake. So maybe there wasn't a truck, but I remember them doing like.
Was that one where they had bio monitors on to check the
I don't know. They were just like, wandering around like a Big Brother setup, but just knackered. Yeah. I remember some guy coming in and doing Tai Chi with them, and I remember if they closed their eyes and started to nod off, a little counter would come on screen, and if they were gone for more than 2 minutes or something, then alarm would go off like, right, you're out. But
it's dangerous.
They just stayed awake. It was like I kept watching it, but it was on every night because obviously they can't stretch this out over 12 weeks. But there's a handful of them, and they just stayed awake, lunatics, and rewatched. I remember
watching Touch the Truck as well because I was grimly fascinated.
Yeah,
and it was just people touching a truck like they do in. Like they have that. It's a regular competition in malls in America.
Yes, it's a thing.
They have sort of live Touch the Truck, and they televise Touch the Truck.
It's mad.
But you wouldn't watch. I wouldn't watch it in a million years now because there's a million other things to watch. But when you're having channels piped at you,
yeah,
sort of stuff that you watch because there's nothing else on.
But nowadays, in a pleasant way, this stuff reminds me of like it's the preserve of YouTube ASMR videos, isn't it? It's watch the Titanic sink in real time for 2 hours and fall asleep, kind of thing.
Things like the Swedish and the Finnish, their slow TV stuff. That's great. Have you seen that? Or it's just like a fire or the camera on the front of a husky dog sled as somebody goes about their day. They're beautiful.
About it, yeah.
BBC4 sometimes show them at Christmas.
Yeah, BBC4 did the British version where it was like the camera's on the front of a barge going around canals in Yorkshire for 2 hours. Yeah. And I love that kind of stuff.
Oh, they're lovely.
I suppose it's become it's shifted to the idea that this is
deliberately soothing.
No, not necessarily. So just pulling it back to the film for a second, I'm still on the topic of found footage. I think it kind of impressed me that the first Paranormal Activity film sets up a very specific rationale for the found footage, and you never see anything beyond it. It's just Mika's one camera that he's expressly set up to capture that ghost, and there's no other reason for it. The situation changes in Paranormal Activity 2. I think in a found footage production, you've got to make a choice at some point of how you justify the fact that it's being filmed, or if you justify it. And it can work or not work either way. Like the other week, we discussed American Horror Story Roanoke, the second half of which is found footage, and that started to really do my head in because they had to keep justifying why people were filming it. And it's like, some more characters come, but they're YouTubers and they're filming everything for YouTube and stuff like that. I was like, I don't care. And weirdly, in Paranormal Activity 2, it's kind of the opposite approach, where they're just filming everything, before any supernatural events have occurred. It's just kind of established that the dad films everything and the daughter films everything, and there's no explanation for it. And I kind of quite like that. I like the fact that they just went, whatever. They need to film it, otherwise there'd be no film. So, like, towards the end of Paranormal Activity 2, the teenage daughter even films, if she makes a significant phone call, she films herself doing it. And there's, no real reason.
I don't know, teens do that. Like, and even pre-teens, like my daughter films herself doing something really menial, and she's like, what are you doing? I don't understand you.
It does start to, I think with Paranormal Activity 2, they kind of struggled their way to a premise, which was them needing to have security cameras.
Yeah.
And it's almost like maybe that needed to happen at the beginning a lot quicker. But then they probably went, oh God, and then we got them literally going to tell this whole movie from the point of view of security cameras. And then it's like, and then they got confused. And it's like, actually, people are filming constantly.
Yeah. I was fine with it. I thought it worked. I didn't enjoy Paranormal Activity 2 as much as the first one, but I thought it was fine. In fact, I think the review that I agree with was I read Roger Ebert's reviews of those two films, and he gave the first one 3.5 stars out of 4.
Yeah.
Oh no, or 2.5 out of 4. Anyway, it's still quite high.
No, I think it was 3.5 out of.
Oh, really?
Very high.
Wow.
Again, okay. I think with Ebert, he was in a really good screening room with a bunch of well-behaved critics.
Right.
It's why they call it the huddle. They call it the huddle as well. If we come out, and because critics are humans, they get into a huddle, and that's when the PRs come in and they start talking to people, and the people that are praising the movie, they make sure their voices are louder.
Right. Okay.
Because if you say, what did you think of that? I thought it was utter shit. They don't talk to you. They go on to the next person, and you feel a bit like, oh, well, I suppose it was all right, but you're already done. And so, they try and manipulate the huddle. It's just human behaviour. And before you know it, Zoolander's been slated by critics. And then we all go back going, why did that huddle? Why did we all end up hating Zoolander? And then we go, it was all right, wasn't it? It wasn't a 2-star film.
But I did think I love Zoolander.
You all hated it.
But I did think what was interesting though is that Roger Ebert's review of Paranormal Activity 2 dropped down to 1.5 stars. And he really took the mickey out of it. But then at the end of the review, he says, look, I have no problem with Paranormal Activity 2. It does what it says it's going to do. And I kind of felt the same way, really. There's loads of nits you could pick in it, but I still found it not too tedious, and it did scare me in a couple of places.
It made me think. I actually liked Paranormal Activity 2 more, but the enjoyment of that wasn't possible if you didn't watch Paranormal Activity 1.
Because of the escalation.
Because of the escalation. And it kind of made me go, what you could probably have done is get those 4 hours of movie and maybe make them one movie. Or just accept that they're both flawed films, and the story of it. I got very bored of there being two people and then a bizarre friend in Paranormal Activity 1 with the occasional appearance of a priest. I got very bored of I did get bored of how few people there were, and I liked the actors in the second one were much sparkier. There was more going on. It was very cliched having the Mexican maid be the superstitious one, but it also had, it also had a much better narrative, which I appreciated, which for me drove me to being more scared. It was the dad finally being oh
the moment when he's like, oh shit,
and apologizing to Martina. That had an emotional impact watching it. But when he goes, oh my god, she was right. That's a piece of storytelling that works. The first one was just one long middle, pretty much, with a bit of escalation. And its innovation was in its production, which they then took into number 2, and they made more of the story. Doesn't quite line up because
basically Paranormal Activity 2 is centered on the family of the sister of Katie. And it introduces the idea that Katie and her sister were both haunted as children, and therefore and are so disturbed by it that when supernatural things happen to them as grown-ups, they don't really talk about it, which is kind of put there to explain why Katie never mentioned even having a sister in Paranormal Activity 1, who was being haunted at apparently the same time as the events of Paranormal Activity 1. But it is quite an interesting idea of these two sisters who've kind of been plagued throughout their lives by this demonic presence. And I do think that's what part 3 is going to go into. So I'd quite like to watch it. And I remember it, when I was looking into, reading up on the whole franchise before doing this, I was pleasantly surprised to think, actually, these movies do feel like they're going to go somewhere. It's almost as if as soon as they'd made the first one,
that was almost like a proof of concept movie.
And then they thought, well, we're probably going to make 3 or 4 more of these because they've made so much money. So it's the second one kind of doesn't do what a lot of sequels do, which is just rehash the first one and run out of ideas. It does sort of do that, but it also sets things up that can be developed elsewhere.
It has some repeated beats. I mean, it even has the repeated information that if you watch 2 of them close together, you're going, why are they telling us that stuff about demons and humans again? It's the same dialogue. It's almost like you could probably not, you could just not watch number 1 and watch number 2 quite happily.
I mean, the reason why I think,
even though it got slagged off, I think it only got slagged off because of over familiarity.
Well,
with the first
let's talk about that in a sec. But I think the reason I slightly prefer Paranormal Activity 1 is that at least it does build up in a linear way to that big jump at the end, which they added on, which Paranormal Activity 2 doesn't really, because it's like they haven't got a big ending. The ending is he goes down into the cellar and looks around in the dark for a bit, but nothing really happens. And then they kind of they redo the ending of Paranormal Activity 1 again, which is Katie gets possessed and throws someone.
Yeah. No,
But,
it's a bit samey. That whole big screaming around in the cellar, which is very Blair Witch. Like, what the hell's going on in there? Shaky.
Yeah.
I think they were too chicken shit to kill the kid.
Yeah. Well, the kid gets led away at the end by the possessed Katie, doesn't he?
Yes,
so
Katie
therefore, that could go anywhere. I'd be interested to watch the next film. I mean, and I don't think they picked that up till Paranormal Activity 4, because 3 is a prequel. So I'd be interested to see what they do with it. And I think the presence of the child there did just raise the stakes a bit, I guess, for the whole movie. And,
And you they introduced a scary grandmother, which they also didn't talk about very much.
Oh, I've forgotten about the scary grandmother already.
If my grandmother sacrificed, like, made a deal with a demon to get rich.
Oh yeah.
I'm trying to work out, are they rich? Because their house.
They're not skint, are they?
For California, they're pretty normal houses, aren't they?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd still think of myself as rich if I had a pool.
Yeah, but I don't think you do in San Diego, do you?
No.
Also, what kind of crappy deal with the devil did you make? If you just got a condo.
Oh dear, that's interesting.
But there's some of the throwaway lines. But the daughter in it was like the standout actor.
Yeah.
And she's gone on to do other stuff, hasn't she? As well as she's in Perry Mason on Sky Atlantic at the moment.
Oh, is she? Okay.
Doing good stuff.
With Matthew Reese, right.
Although I started watching Perry Mason last night, and talking of dead babies, there's a dead baby in the first 5 minutes, so it got turned off in our house. And it also looked really fake. It looked really fake, like a sort of cheap Sin City, like they'd filmed it in a warehouse with loads of green screen.
Right. Because it's set in the 1930s. Yeah.
But 1930s, they decided not to bother filming in the real world at all.
No.
But anyway, that's another thing. But I think there's lots of great stuff to say about it, but I think it's aged quite badly for the time. I think there's a lot to write about and a lot to discuss about it because of the time it comes out of. But what's the next? I was about to say what's the next found footage, but we know what that is. It's Zoom, and
for now, definitely. I mean,
that was a brilliant. The host was just a brilliant. Like, this is how, it's not just how we're living, COVID or not. We're kind of going to be doing a lot more of this anyway. But I thought that was just brilliant in that it moved. It didn't just stay static either. Like, they moved around with their cameras. The technology we've got now doesn't mean your computer screen is a big lump. Like, your camera's not even on your shoulder now. It's, you could have lots of different people doing lots of different things like they did in Host.
I mean, that's, I think, the main thing that dates Paranormal Activity, isn't it? That it's a huge camera.
That camera.
And weirdly, I'm sure it was huge and dated as a camera even at the time that film was made. I think we were using more compact cameras than that when I was at uni. So,
well, it was a 2006 they made it as well.
Yeah.
So it didn't get released till 2009. So, but I think, like we were saying before, I think one of the problems is the sort of whole, why are they filming this? Like, even now, do people just sit there filming? Like that? Well,
I think you've always got to either get over that, or you've got to decide that you're just not going to bother. I mean, spoilers for our next episode, which is going to be about what we do in the shadows. Yeah. I think in the TV series of that, which is wonderful, I think there are lots of moments, because it's supposedly a docudrama.
Yeah.
Like a docu-soap. There's lots of moments where you think, there's nobody. Why would they film this bit? Who's there? But who cares? Because it's funny. It works.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's acceptable just to go, whatever. If it's working, just go with it.
Yeah, but it's almost yeah. I mean, because the American Office went on for 10 years, and it's like, well, they're going to bring this documentary out.
Yeah, gee, that's the most comprehensive workplace documentary ever produced.
Yeah, and even in the Ricky Gervais version, at least they had the moment when it had been released, and he was like expecting people to recognise him in like the Christmas specials. Whereas,
gee, I never saw those actually.
They were
Christmas ones.
They were pretty good, but yeah, he was like, "Oh yeah, you recognise me, yeah," and they were like, "No, what you? Oh yeah, you're the bloke off airport. What, the fat one?" It was
wow.
Yeah, but no, that's not really the main issue with them. Is you just have to? It's a conceit you sort of have to go with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
you have to do that with all horror or film. So if we take the most annoying aspects of, say, the slasher, it's like when they're still 2020, they still run upstairs, they still lock themselves, hide in a wardrobe, and it's like, but we're okay with that. And it's just, I think if you're going to sit down and watch a fan footage movie, you're either in with the fan footage and it is going to be this kind of camera work and it's going to look like this and it's going to be framed in this way. You're either in it and you're up for it, or you're not. I think it's kind of that same. If you don't like fan footage horror, if you find that the conceit is problematic or overdone or troublesome, then watch it. I think, rather than, I guess, I don't understand why people watch films that they know they're not going to like because they don't like similar ones that have come before, then watch it and then take to social media and things and go, well, that was rubbish. Come on. If you don't think you're going to like it, leave it. Where's the horror film you've made? I don't see it.
Yeah. No, it's a
good point.
But it's I don't mind the fan footage. But
I mean, I would say that I haven't seen many. Can I go first, Ian? I mean, I'd say that I suspect there's a kind of prejudice against fan footage stuff being so prevalent. But when I look at my own experience, I've seen a very small number of fan footage films. These two, Blair Witch, Wreck, and that might be it. And they were all great. Oh, Cloverfield, that's a good one. Yeah.
I mean,
I like that too. So they were all great. It's just that I suppose there's a strong sense that I think they can't push this very far. I mean, Host as well. I guess you'd say Host is fan footage now.
It's fan footage. Yeah.
So hard drive.
I love the idea
desktop
of being...
horror is what it's kind of called.
Who clicked OK? Do you want to convert these files?
Well, my friend of mine, Shelley McMurdo, she writes on fan footage horror, and she sort of coined the phrase desktop horror, or then you've got social media horror with things like Unfriended.
Yeah.
So you can sort of categorize them further away from just the overall umbrella of fan footage if you want to, but Host would definitely go in the desktop horror / fan footage arena.
Yeah, and Unfriended was good as well.
I loved that one, and the sequel to that one's probably better.
I've not seen it.
The Dark Web, it's good.
Oh, is that the sequel? Yeah. No.
And that's another one that Rob likes a lot.
My Little Eye is not. Is that?
Oh yeah.
That's an amazing film.
Yeah,
that's great.
That's kind of ahead of its time.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, it starts with the noise of a dial-up router. That's how old it is.
But when you hear that noise now, you go, but at the time it was,
At the time it was like, well, at least I'm not waiting for The Hobbit to load on a cassette deck. But,
brilliant.
But My Little Eye is a brilliant film.
It is. And I remember watching it when I was at uni, and it was at the time when we just didn't make horror films in Britain anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's probably might have even been before 28 Days Later.
It was
2001, 2002 time.
I didn't think
this was a British film that had to pretend to be American. So therefore they had Canadian actors in it, which is how you pretend to be American when you're a British film. You get Canadian actors. But I remember finding it chilling and really effective.
It was a brilliant film. But Mark Evans directed that. I mean, you should do an episode on it because it's talk about forgotten classics. I really think that is, it's. I think I'm right. It's all filmed from the webcams because
it's all mini
they're on a
DV.
snuff site, and they don't know they're on a snuff site, and it's still chilling now. And that there's that brilliant bit where, excuse the profanity, where the guy who's turned up out of they think has just turned up at the cabin, and then after he has sex with her, he very quietly says, "I told you I could fuck her," and you realise he's one of the rich people that set this whole thing up. But yeah, maybe slightly off topic. But that to me is statement a lot more than Paranormal Activity.
Yeah. So Ian, you were talking about comparing Paranormal Activity to Blair Witch. So is there anything more you'd like to say about that? Because we mentioned Blair Witch on here the other week because it's one of my most frightening films, and I think Stella, you agreed that you and Kirsty both agreed that it was so powerful. So what gives it the edge for you?
Well, probably the things that people thought, the minimalist aspect of Paranormal Activity, the fact that it's all in a house, and that's kind of one of its strengths, is it does make the domestic scary. But Blair Witch, on the other hand, taps into, the Little Red Riding Hood, primal fear of forests and witches, which always work. They do on me anyway.
Scary woods, done.
Yeah, scary woods and weird little pagan dollies hanging from trees, and so it's got genre tropes, which we're all familiar with, but it does it in a very new way, in that it has real people. And I think that's kind of what slasher movies half do anyway, is they have people that are just like us being chased by axe murderers, and it's a bit like, what would you do? And the fact is, but in the slasher movies, they do stuff we wouldn't do.
Yeah, I would do that.
When Blair Witch Project, they do what we would do, which is get all snotty and scream and cry in a tent.
Yeah, wig out.
And it also weaves in a brilliant story that you have to kind of be, and the fact that they don't chuck someone against the camera at the end. They have a boy standing in a corner, and that gives me the heebie-jeebies even now.
Yeah. The reason that is so effective is because
they set up to that.
Yeah,
like
the setup is so good.
Arsing about in the cinema probably did, but if you watch it really quietly and you tense and you get the bit about the corner, and then you see that's a brilliantly brave ending. It's the opposite of throwing Miko at a camera. Which worked because there's lots to be said for. There's lots to they all use cinematic techniques, and one of the things that Paranormal Activity does is the timing. Like with comedy, timing in horror is everything. You can, like you were saying about the gap they leave. It's not a clever edit or anything. It's timing between her scream and you going, I can't see what's happening. They're not going to and then you calm down. If they'd done it too quickly, it would have been, oh, is that the end of the movie?
Is that it? Yeah, you'd have been left with that.
So the timing is perfect. But it's made me think of another bit in My Little Eye where they're creeping around the house, and I probably jumped more than anything in the cinema as they turn a tap on really loud in My Little Eye. False jump. But the fact that you can be scared of anything, if you get the timing and the atmosphere right.
My favourite false jump is at the start of 28 Days Later with the car alarm. He's got out of his home and he's mooching through London, and he's not been mooching on his own for very long, and there's a couple of cars in the middle of a junction, and he goes to try the car to see if he can drive it, and a car alarm goes off. And I saw that in the cinema, and everyone was at least a foot off their chair, and it was great.
Wow.
Really, really good.
No.
Just use a car alarm.
I do love a good jump scare.
Yeah.
I watched Slender Man the other day with my children, and who were like 12 and 11, so perfect age for Slender Man. And
did it work?
Seeing it through that, it made us all jump a lot. I wouldn't say it was the best film ever made, but there's something about Slender Man that's a scary looking thing. But it's not a great film, but it really worked.
Stella. I think
I
you
was
were
going
going
to
to
say
mention.
hold the thought on Slender Man.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we'll do an episode on that.
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
In the future.
That film was one of Stella's recommendations the other week, but also we were talking about Marble Hornets, weren't we? Which is Slender Man on YouTube.
Yeah.
That's really terrifying. So.
Oh, is that like a more of a?
That's a YouTube series that kind of involves the Slender Man figure. And
Yeah.
it's basically a very long series of short videos that you have to watch in order, and they give you. There's not much. It's not really character led or anything, but there's text on the screen to give you context, and it's all supposed to be footage that was shot for a movie that was never completed, like a documentary, and just every now and then the Slender Man appears in various ways. And it's great in that it concentrates your attention, and therefore creates that Paranormal Activity like effect where the smallest things have a huge power, and so it's just something appearing in the background of one shot or whatever. It's really, really well done. So I haven't watched the whole thing. I need to watch the rest of it.
Yeah, and there's lots of stuff coming out of that. Like we're talking recommendations. An audio on the audio side, there's the left-right game.
Yes, that was one of Kirsty's recommendations the other week, and I've started.
Oh my god, it's good, so good. And they're
I've
making
only listened to one episode. Oh really?
Yeah. So talk of proof of concept, but that is now optioned to be a movie.
Okay.
Because it stars. Oh, I can't remember her name. She's from Westworld.
Yeah.
But it's brilliant. I mean, that's one of the best audios.
Right.
Got some amazing stuff in it. But yeah, that's definitely a recommendation for.
Well, before
that goes in your ears and not your eyes.
I think time's coming up to the limit that we have today anyway. So should we go into recommendations? Have either of you got final thoughts about Paranormal Activity you'd like to see or say rather?
It's made me want to watch 3 and 4.
Yeah, me too.
Because no matter how much they slagged off number 2, I thought 1 and 2 were a better film than 1 by itself and 2 by itself, which is maybe good news for the people making money off them. I'd say don't watch just 1 and don't watch just 2. Watch 1 and 2 together, and then that's now maybe because I hadn't watched 2 till the other day for this. And that's made me want to watch more. So maybe that's good news for the franchise people. There's a whole bunch of people now be going, "Ooh, okay, I'll go and give 3 and 4 and 5 a go."
Me too. I think
I kind of want to find out what happens to. I don't know why it's called Toby with an I, but apparently he is the worst name for a demon ever.
Is that the demon's name Toby with an I?
According to Wikipedia.
Okay. I didn't read that far.
And it's made me want to see, because the idea of a boy and Katie, it's kind of does up the stakes. It's just her. She's never been seen again. I don't know why they said that when there was the footage for number 2. Had that not been found at that point?
It was still in a bin.
Perhaps.
Oh, yeah. Just after we found that footage and put that whole film together, we just found this footage.
One day later.
Murdered people. Her sister. But anyway, and then the idea of Katie and her nephew being spooky and covered in blood and walking down the highway.
I'm intrigued.
I don't want to see them again. I'm a bit disappointed the third one's a prequel, to be honest. Although, watch it.
It sounds like 3 and 4 were made pretty much back to back by the same filmmakers. So I think there's an overall plan. Have you seen them, Stella? You sound quite knowledgeable.
Yes, I have.
Okay.
I've seen 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Okay. So I hear that actually it's only 6 that's bad. I hear 5's quite good.
Yeah, that's what I hear as well. So one of the students who I was supervising dissertation for, and he was looking at Paranormal Activity, he was saying, because I'd only seen 1, 2, 3, and 4, and he was like, "Watch 5, then walk away." Walk away. It's like, "Oh, I pay attention to what you say," because when you have a student in your class and they're just so incredibly knowledgeable, they've seen so many films.
They teach you,
Yeah, he was the one I was always like, "Is it that director? Or is it that guy? What is it?" And he'd always just be like, "Boom," and he'd know. So when he said, "Leave 6 alone," I'm gonna do what he says.
No, okay.
It's a good one.
Have you seen 3 and 4 then, and you'd recommend?
Yeah.
No caveats, just
no caveats.
If you liked 1 and 2.
Yeah, I suppose the only caveat I would give you is that I try not to dislike films, because I always think it's such a hard thing to do, to get it made, to get it funded, to do everything. So if people have made this and they've worked hard, and if it's not my box of frogs, then it's not my box of frogs. Doesn't mean it's a bad film. It's not for me. So when any recommendation that comes out of my mouth, it's just me going, yeah, it's great, they've made a film. go watch it. But yeah, if you did like 1 and 2, then you'll enjoy 3 and 4. If you didn't like 1 and 2, probably don't bother.
The elements I liked of 1 and 2, and more in 2, I think, was a little bit more story and more interesting characters. And if they improve on those elements, then I think I'll go and have a go on 3 and 4.
Yeah, do it.
Yeah, me too. So, by the way, Stella, I think that your approach sounds quite the sanest. You know, just like things.
Just like things. People have made it. If it's not for you, somebody else will watch it.
Ultimately, negativity takes away more energy. There are things I don't like, but I don't like not liking them because it kills my soul just a little bit.
Yeah, I don't set out to dislike things. I think it's very useful to see what straight away you start going, where would you have put your pencil through the script? What would you have done differently? And you kind of know they're probably thinking that themselves, because you look at how they did number 2 and they were thinking that themselves.
Yeah, it's definitely, you can see the learning curve, I think.
Yeah,
in the 2 films.
For Paranormal Activity on its own can be seen as, oh my God, you made a movie and you spent $1,000 on your two lead actors. And you filmed it in your own house using tech you already had. And you've made a massive Hollywood, global franchise. So well done.
Fair dues.
You must have something going on. And then, given more time, they've made it more interesting.
Yeah.
And they've built on it in a way that I approve of. So
yeah.
The fact that it just gets that little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
I think Paranormal Activity 1 is too simple, really. It's almost like as an exercise. For me, I wouldn't go out of my way to watch it again because it's so simple. I hadn't seen it for 14 years. Oh no, 11 years or whatever. Yeah, 11 years. And I hadn't felt the urge to watch it again, and I wouldn't have done if it hadn't been for this. And it was a bit like once is enough. That's not a terrible thing to say about a movie.
No, I mean,
in a weird way, Blair Witch had a bit of that. I didn't watch that again for a long time, even though I really liked it. Whereas
basically,
movies, I can watch over and over again because they're complex pieces of drama.
Yeah.
Look, it's actually very difficult to make a film that is good enough for one viewing, isn't it? That is a significant achievement. And the movies where you go, that was great, I immediately want to watch it again, they are very rare.
Yeah.
And the ones that are actually still good when you do watch them again, instead of actually, oh, no, that's actually not very good, that's even rarer. So, so I think if you enjoy a film once, then it passes the grade, really. But but no, I don't think I'll go back to see it again. But I will go further in the series and watch the other 3, 4, 5. I think, definitely I'm intrigued. Okay, guys, shall we move on to the recommendations for this week?
Yeah.
Okay, so Stella, do you want to go first? Because we've
I do.
already heard from Ian.
I've only watched the first episode, and so far that was great. And that is Ares on Netflix, and it is a Dutch Netflix original drama, and it's a horror. It's called Ares, spelled A-R-E-S. Okay. And the synopsis is an Amsterdam student joins a secret society that's been around since the Dutch Golden Age, but must decide how far she's willing to go to rise up the ranks. So it's a bit, I think it's going to be a bit culty. So obviously that's right up my street. I only watched the first episode. It's got, so far, decent star ratings on all the things that I've looked at. And it's creepy and it's interesting. It's really beautifully made. So Ares on Netflix. Check it out.
Okay, that's fun. That's new to me. Ian, do you have another recommendation besides the left-right game?
I just looked at what's on. I always recommend Black Coat's Daughter, which I don't know if you've heard of.
That's the film directed by Anthony Perkins' son, Oz Perkins.
Yeah, Osgood Perkins. And I'm always recommending that to people, especially with the warning that The Black Coat's Daughter is an amazing title, dripping with sort of mood and darkness.
But it's not called that in this country, is it?
Bloody February.
Bloody February.
No, it's just called February.
Oh, it's called February, right?
Oh, Bloody February sounds better.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. But I looked up February and Black Coat's Daughter, and they've fallen off Netflix, which is annoying. But I'd say it's worth spending money on. But Osgood Perkins' talk about a slow burn. I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House is another of his movies that is, if you thought The Witch was slow, probably don't watch it.
Right, okay.
So it's glacial, and I found it terrifying. It's beautiful.
Right, okay.
It's and you'll go, why was he moaning about nothing happening in Paranormal Activity?
All right, and then we'll come for you then.
But it is a brilliant film, and it's a ghost story. I am the pretty thing that lives in the house, and the opening shot is just her face for bloody ages going.
Okay.
Really creepy music.
I am intrigued by Oz Perkins.
It's a masterpiece of scaring people,
right,
in a really slow way.
Oh, brilliant.
But and so was Black Coat's Daughter, which is just fantastic and should be watched by everybody.
He made a new film last year, didn't he?
Genuflecting Satanist in when Satanists go really quick, backwards and forwards when they're genuflecting.
Oh, right, okay.
In a slightly possessed kind of way. There's a scene when she's seen doing that from a distance, and it makes me poo my pants every time. But it's good to recommend modern movies anyway, because
definitely.
Osgood Perkins is absolutely amazing, and I can't wait to see what he does next.
It's always heartening to dig up some new stuff, which is
he should be better known than Ari Aster.
Well, he did do his third film last year, didn't he? It was called Gretel and Hansel.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's out over here yet. No, I haven't seen it yet. I hear it's okay, but it's more of a kind of director for hire kind of job than his previous movies.
Yeah.
But no, those are all good shouts, and I think I'm going to spend some money on I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. Have I got that title right?
Good title.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's on Netflix.
Right. Oh,
perfect.
Black Coat's Daughter has just dropped off, which I don't know if that means it's popped onto Prime. But I have a feeling it might have been a Netflix movie.
Last time I searched for Black Coat's Daughter, it wasn't available free anywhere.
No, it must have just dropped off. Probably because people keep recommending it.
Right.
So they decided to make some money.
Okay. So, that's great. Thank you, Ian. My recommendations for this week are both free if you've got Netflix or Amazon Prime. Bram Stoker's Dracula is on Netflix, and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is on Amazon Prime at the moment. So if you want to go back and check out some old school films of some old school texts, then highly recommended. Stella and Kirsty and myself have all talked about those movies before as being kind of key formative early horror movies.
Is it true that Diamanda Galus did the voice of Winona Ryder being possessed in Bram Stoker's Dracula?
I don't know.
I seem to remember she was.
Who's she?
Oh God, you should listen to. There's a recommendation. Listen to on YouTube. Go to Diamanda Galus, Unclean, and it's her. Tell I used to be a goth. It's her in her crazy voice, doing reciting Leviticus, which says unclean every so often, interspersed with medieval satanic chanting.
That's kind of chanting, though,
satanic language, and it's genuinely unsettling. But when I was at university, we all took acid and put all the lights out and put the vinyl on, and we all ran screaming into the street. Because it's genuinely satanic.
It's not done you any harm.
Don't do drugs, kids. But yeah, that's a recommendation, and I just looked it up the other day, and it's on YouTube, so you could just listen to how amazing the Amanda Gallus' voice is.
Right, I'll put a link in the show notes for that as well.
Really
fantastic. I do remember that when I watched Bram Stoker's Dracula after several years, I think it was just on TV one night.
It was on telly a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, right. Well, I mean,
I watched it again.
I'm talking about like 10 years ago, but I do watch it again, and I remember maybe because the sound was just better quality on the TV transmission than on my old VHS. There is a bit where Winona Ryder, I think it's the bit where Winona Ryder almost drinks Dracula's blood, and then they rescue her. And I could hear that she, as they pulled her from the room, she was going, "Unclean, unclean, unclean." So maybe that's this person's voice that you're talking about.
Oh, it might be. Maybe, yeah.
I'll have to research that. But I do remember knowing that the sound design on Bram Stoker's Dracula was by a guy called Leslie Schatz. It's a great name for a very renowned Hollywood sound designer. And there's loads. I mean, if you listen to the soundtrack of that movie, there's loads of weird layers of voices on top of the music. And I think some of the tracks on the soundtrack are actually just spooky voices.
Excellent.
There's no music going on. So they did obviously put a lot of effort into the soundtrack of that movie. Cool. Nice one. Well, I'll hunt that person down, Ian, and I'll find out the truth of that, definitely. Well, thank you very much, folks. That's another episode of And Now the Podcast Starts. Thank you very much, Ian, for joining us and filling in for Kirsty and bringing a different voice to proceedings. That's been great fun. Thank you very much, Stella, for your erudite contribution, as always. Next week, folks, Kirsty will be back and we'll be discussing, as we've been wanting to for a while, what we do in the shadows.
Yay!
And that should be a lot
TV
of fun.
Series.
And the film.
And the film.
And the short film that it was all started with.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. We love all that. So that's going to be a very positive episode, I think.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you very much, Stella. Thank you very much, Ian. And I will say farewell, listeners. We'll be back. Bye-bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to And Now the Podcast Starts. Produced and released by Ambidextrous Solutions Limited. Presented by T.D. Velasquez and Stella Gaynor. With special guest, Ian Winterton. Special thanks to Greg Hume for our original theme music, and to Brian Gorman for our original artwork. All dialogue and music clips from films, TV shows, and trailers are used for the purposes of criticism, in the spirit of fair dealing as defined in UK law, and fair use as defined in US law. No copyright infringement is intended. Please visit our home on the web, www.andnowpodcast.com, for more content and contact details. Or visit our Facebook pages at AndNowPod or at Lee Cushing Pod. Follow us on Twitter at AndNowPodcast or at Lee Cushing Podcast. If you'd like to donate to us, please visit patreon.com/AndNowPodcast. And now the podcast stops.